Carter's First Case by Charles Caldwell. Read by Roger Daltrey.
Carter Battersby was perplexed. 3 short weeks earlier, he had been sent for an interview by the job centre. Having filled in private investigator, detection and undercover work as absolutely the only jobs he was prepared to accept, he'd expected to have several trouble-free years sponging off the state before being forced to accept employment again. He had not enjoyed working for the Refuse Disposal Department's transport office, and the feeling was definitely mutual. His irritation that an opening with Percy Tucker Investigations, confidentiality guaranteed, had appeared was magnified when he was offered the job. The ailing Percy was desperate and had not warmed to the other applicant, a police officer who had taken early retirement after too many confessions had been found to emanate from bruised prisoners. The last 3 weeks had been eventful and, to Carter's surprise, quite interesting. He had followed an erring husband for 10 days and obtained photographic evidence of his alfresco activities with a strapping fitness instructor of uncertain gender. He was also currently staking out an allotment to trap a nocturnal dahlia nobbler. It was all quite painless and enjoyable, until Percy succumbed to his 3rd heart attack. His widow, Dorothy, implored Carter to carry on the business, as she had no other means of support. The bread and butter work was regular and undeniably sufficient to support them both, and she was prepared to give him 60% of both the profits and the capital value of the premises, and goodwill. Carter was unable to resist the plight of Dorothy Tucker, or the romantic vision of himself as the 23-year-old sleuth, protector of widows and denizen of the twilight world of crime. But now he had a proper case and didn't know where to begin. His partner, the widow Dorothy, had phoned to ask him to go post-haste to the home of a friend who was prepared to pay handsomely for a very swift resolution to a confidential domestic problem. The Ponderosa was a spectacular example of the pseudo-hacienda style of architecture favoured by those blessed with a great deal more money than taste.
"You're a bit young, aren't you, love?"
said Trish Potter.
"Well, never mind. Dotty says you know what you're on about. And old Percy, God rest his soul, wouldn't have taken you on if you didn't, would he, eh?"
Trish Potter hitched the pink housecoat together over her ample brown, freckled bosom and continued.
"It's a matter of life and death, Carter. You don't mind if I call you Carter, do you?"
"No, that's fine.
Only I feel funny calling a young chap like you Mr. Battersby. You see, Carter, it's a very delicate matter, and I need your absolute discretion. My Bernard would do his nut, and I daren't tell the police because I don't know whether it's, well, you know, on the level with the tax and the VAT, if you know what I mean."
She paused, expectantly. No, I'm afraid I don't, Mrs. Potter. What is it you daren't call the police about, exactly?"
"My coat, love. My lovely Russian sable. Didn't Dotty tell you? It's gone. I was only out for half an hour. He'll go, what's it? I left the bedroom window open, and I noticed when I came back, ran upstairs to check, and it was gone. He's always on about security and alarms, but I was only going round the corner to the chemist for my tranquilizers. You can help me, can't you?"
Her fingers dug into his upper arm so hard that he yelped. "Yes, of course, Mrs. Potter. Just leave it to me."
"I'll do anything to get that coat back before tonight, Carter. Anything. Name your price."
"Well, I charge expenses, obviously, plus an hourly rate of—"
"I'll give you 500 in cash, Carter, if that coat is back in my closet before Bernard comes home tonight."
Carter started by examining the window. Having examined it for a good 5 minutes, from inside and out, he felt that nothing more was to be gained by staring blankly at a very ordinary window, which bore no telltale shreds of clothing or bloodstains, no train ticket or wallet lodged in the bushes below, no footprint in the soft earth, no marks of a ladder. It seemed to Carter's very inexpert eye that no one had entered through that window. Yet the coat was certainly not in the cupboard, as the very empty silk-padded hanger bore testimony. What on earth now? Ask the neighbours. You never know, he thought, suppressing the leaden certainty that he did, in fact, know very well. I'll just have a word with some of your neighbours and ask if they saw anyone suspicious hanging around this morning, and, we'll take it from there, he explained as he headed out of the studded oak effect front door. Quite what he would do if the neighbours had noticed anything, he didn't know. 8 suspicious neighbours later, Carter was no closer to anything resembling a lead. What would Peter Wimsey do now? Or Sam Spade? He mused gloomily as he sat in his car and watched a black limo glide up to the gates of the Ponderosa's long drive. The only occupant, a uniformed chauffeur, glanced up and down the street, sidled into the drive and emerged seconds later with a black plastic bin bag, which he placed on the front seat of the car before speeding off. "Oh, yes," thought Carter, as he fired the engine of the firm's Fiat Uno. "It must be. I can see it all. A gentleman cracksman, dressed from head to foot in black, must have slipped in and out of the Ponderosa, leaving no trace, and stashed the loot for his accomplice, who must have been his Batman in the army, to collect at leisure when the heat was off. Yes!" Carter had never tailed anyone before. For the first time since he had inherited the Uno along with the business, he was grateful that the vehicle was so nondescript. It was surprisingly easy, despite the odd worrying moment when vehicles slipped in between them at roundabouts and intersections. If Carter had been a little more experienced in his new profession, it is probable that he would not have followed the limo right into the car park at the back of the trading estate. But if the chauffeur had registered his presence, he gave no indication. A thick-set grey-haired man in a shiny suit bustled down the fire escape at the back of the building and was handed the black plastic sack. He opened it and immediately hurled it on the ground in rage. The bag burst open, spilling its messy contents over the asphalt. Shiny then vigorously berated Uniform, whose body language gave every indication of the aggrieved innocence of a minion doing his best in difficult circumstances. Then they both got back into the car, which swung out of the car park in the direction Carter suspected of the Ponderosa. Carter's first piece of real detection was a mixture of intuition and pure luck. Instead of sticking close to his only lead, he gambled on a hunch and headed for the waste disposal site at Barley Hill. 20 minutes later, he was standing, as his mother would say, like Piffy on a monument, on a mountain of black plastic bags. A quick word with the site foreman had led him to the eastern edge of the landfill site, and a promise of no further waste tipping that afternoon. 45 minutes after that, he was holding a coat which would have reduced the anti-fur lobbyist to apoplexy. As the grin of triumph spread across his face, he heard a voice bellowing from behind him. "Before you get any big ideas, son, that's my property you've got there. Go and get it, Harry." As Harry the chauffeur advanced towards him purposefully, Carter decided to play the only card he had. "I'm afraid you're mistaken, gentlemen. I'm a private investigator, and this coat is the property of my client. I must ask you to let me pass, or I shall be obliged to take the matter further," he finished lamely. "I don't care if you're Sherlock Bloody Holmes, lad. It's mine, and you'll get a sound smacking if you don't hand it over pronto." "Better do what Mr. Potter says, son," offered Harry. "He doesn't make idle threats." "Mr. Potter? Oh, no," started Carter. "Shut your stupid mouth, Harry. No names, no pack drill, eh?" shouted the now firmly identified Bernard Potter. "Is Trish Potter your wife?" "Eh? What's that got to do with you? What's going on here? Just what the hell are you doing with that coat? And how did you know it belonged to my wife?" Carter had no option but to explain his mission. Obviously, Potter knew of the coat's absence from its proper place at the Ponderosa, so there was no way to protect his client. He decided to come clean and hoped to avoid at least the promised smacking, which, looking at the two men facing him, he had no reason to doubt would be comprehensive and efficient. They listened carefully to his story. There was a long pause as Bernard Potter pursed his lips thoughtfully and gave a low whistle. "Right, son. What you will do is this." A little while later, Carter was explaining to his client that he had found a couple of very strong leads and was confident that he could recover the coat within 3 days at the most.
"Well, son, as it turns out,"
replied Trish, now dressed in a peach-coloured trouser suit with embroidered panda motifs,
"that may be hunky-dory. Bernard's just phoned. He's away on business till the weekend. Just as long as it's back before then, oh, I'll be so grateful, dear Carter."
Bernard Potter had cash flow problems. He needed £30,000 in cash urgently, and the coat could raise it painlessly and swiftly, with the promise of similarly swift and painless redemption if the deal went through satisfactorily a few days later. He had stashed the coat in a bin bag by the gate for Harry to collect. However, the refuse collection had been a day early, because of the impending bank holiday at the weekend, and Harry had picked up a bag of fresh rubbish taken out later by the cleaner. Carter's brief sojourn with the waste disposal department had not only provided him with the knowledge of the early collection, but had led him to the right tip at the right place, ahead of Potter and before the precious coat had been buried under tons of waste. Bernard handed over the coat to Carter 3 days later, and having done extremely well on his unspecified and probably best forgotten deal, pressed £500 into his hand with a conspiratorial wink. The grateful Trish, who brushed aside Carter's modest mutterings about routine procedures and all in a day's work, gave him the promised £500 fee plus a bonus of £100 for expenses, despite his protestations about £5 for petrol being enough. Well, thought Carter, as he adopted a nonchalant pose in front of the office mirror, at least it will keep me going until that mysterious leggy blonde with the black veil staggers in and faints in my arms. Meanwhile, back to the Dahlia Wars.